A report from Group 17 by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 2. Fergus O'Neill, age 36, Ph.D., FNBS, sat at his desk in his dismal office and stared out the window at the dirty snow, the murky sky, the bedraggled bushes, and bare birch trees standing like skeletons holding hands. There was a pile of aged correspondence unopened on his desk. He was suffering from a hangover. Still, he mustered his thoughts in a logical manner. Problem. What do you do when you solve a problem? Solution. You find a new problem. Problem. What new problem? Solution. But there, each time, he went blank. How do you summon the energy after 3 years of hard work night and day to start all over again? He recognized his ailment, one peculiar to research scientists, who call it PTSD, or PTS, post-terminal slump. For 2 years, he had worked on the B virus, he and Jerome and John, the Midnight Squad, and finally they had isolated it. Then another year, as John said, training it, getting it to do what it was supposed to do, and finally, wildly succeeding. And now, PTS. Problem. How to regenerate enthusiasm. Solution. Take a vacation. They had husbanded the research grant, which was non-accountable. There was still a little money left. Take time off to think about the unpleasant alternatives. A steady job in a corporation laboratory teaching, endless papers to correct, seas of bright undergraduate faces at 8 a.m, and him with a hangover. Tricky question. From show-off junior beta kappas, he knew. He had been one himself. At age 12, it was discovered that Fergus O'Neill, then attending junior high school in Massapequa, Long Island, had an IQ that ran off the chart. This fact was supposed to be concealed from him. Intelligence ratings were confidential to avoid odious comparisons. But it filtered through, from school psychologists to teachers, to his parents, to Fergus. It did not make him conceited. Instead, he regarded it with the same mild sense of good fortune as he did having good vision, an ear for music, and the ability to swim the 100-meter freestyle fast enough to make the team. They were endowments, not achievements. In high school, Fergus got A in all subjects except biology, where, to everyone's astonishment except his own, he got only a poor C-. He himself was more annoyed than surprised. Biology was a subject with which he could not come to grips, and he was reasonably sure that the fault lay not in him but in the subject himself. As taught in the Massapequa schools, at least, biology was a mixture of folklore and tradition, inexact description, arbitrary classification and nomenclature, and endless memorization. It was not a science at all in the sense that physics was, or even chemistry. From Pliny to Linnaeus, biologists were mere journalists of the obvious, note-keepers, prosy lecturers, bird-watchers. Not until Darwin and Mendel was there even the beginning of an analytical approach, the asking of how and why rather than merely what and where. Yet it was potentially a true science. He had the feeling, even in high school, that it was on the edge of revolution. In college, Fergus argued with himself for almost 3 years as to whether his major study should be history or physics. Late one night in the middle of his junior year, he decided against both in favor of biology. He thought it is, in the end, the basic subject without which there could be neither of the others. He also thought that if there was a revolution coming, he might help it along. There was a knock on his office door, and Miss Penfield entered. Miss Penfield, whose first name was Adele, was secretary to Fergus and 2 other faculty members at the Institute for Advanced Biological Studies in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She had been hired not for her looks, nor even for her speed at shorthand, but because she had a background in biology and knew how to spell ribonucleic, cytidine, and glycoside. She was plain of face and destined for spinsterhood, a fact she accepted calmly. She was devoted to all three of her masters, but especially to Fergus, since he alone remained a bachelor. She had never seen his rooms, but she was sure they were not properly dusted. Since she was older than he was, she called him by his first name, a liberty she did not take with her two professors, both of whom were in their 60s. "Miss Penfield," said Fergus, still staring out the window, "do you know why I prefer the laboratory to the office? Because it has no windows. A window on Cambridge in April is an offense. You're seeing the last October snow, and it's turned rotten." Miss Penfield was familiar with PTS. "You could pull down the shade. That would be escapism. The laboratory is windowless for a purpose. Whether the shade is up or down, that decayed snow is out there. So are all the dead trees and bushes. In April, they should be alive again. The fact is, Cambridge is unfit for human habitation. I've lived here all my life," said Miss Penfield. "Fergus, you feel bad because you've finished with the bee virus. I know it, but looking out the window helps." "Helps how, if it's so ugly?" "Helps me to make up my mind." "You're not thinking about leaving?" She sounded distressed. "I'm thinking about never seeing another winter in New England." "But you've never seen one locked up in that laboratory. Sometimes it's beautiful. People come here from all over." She stopped, remembering what she had come for. "That man who called." "What man?" "The man from Washington, the colonel. He called you 3 times yesterday, I told you." "Starting with lunchtime," Fergus said. "I don't remember yesterday very well." "I suppose not. Anyway, he's coming in to see you." "About what?" "He wouldn't say, but I can make a guess." "Make it." "He's a colonel. He's from Washington. He wants to offer you a job. He's one of them." She put the word "them" in italics with quotation marks around it. "Miss Penfield, you forget. There is no more them. Germ warfare has been abolished." "That's what they say. They didn't abolish the generals who ran it." "And you committed me anyway?" "Well, I couldn't be sure, and he sounded pleasant enough, so I didn't want to be rude." Only a few minutes after the visitor arrived, Fergus could recall that Miss Penfield's intuition had been, as usual, accurate. He wore civilian clothes, a dark blue suit. He had dark gray hair and a calm face. He handed Fergus a card which said, "James Attenborough, Colonel, United States Army." In the lower left-hand corner was the additional information, research and development. "Have a chair, Colonel." "What is it that you research and develop?" "For the past several days, the research is centered on you, your published papers, your current work with the bee virus, which is, I believe, just completed but not yet published. As to what we'll develop," he smiled, "that's up to you." He spoke as if he had an unmilitary sense of humor, as Miss Penfield had said, pleasant enough. "And before that, I was in charge of a section at Fort Detrick. Biological weapons, specifically microbiology and virology." "And now find yourself unemployed?" "Not quite. I'm regular Army, so the most I'd get would be a transfer. As it turns out, it isn't even much of a transfer, for the moment at least. But we've banned biological weapons. We have, they haven't. Nearly half of our work at Fort Detrick was figuring out what the opposition was working on and how to counterattack it. In other words, you go on just as before. There are those who think we should. I'm not one of them. I don't like germs. You can't aim them accurately. But you're still at Fort Detrick." "In and out. Right now I'm on a special project, rather an odd one. What brings me here." "Why here?" "Because I want to ask your help. In fact, I'm offering you a job." Score 2 for Miss Penfield. "What's the nature of the project?" "Biological weapons." "Defensive, of course." "Of course." "I'm sorry, Colonel. You know as well as I do that in biology, my branch of it at least, you can't separate offense from defense. If it's at Fort Detrick, if it's for the Army, it's military. The potential is there, tied up in the knowledge. I won't touch it, now or ever." The colonel smiled again. He looked as if he had heard exactly what he expected to hear. He said, "The project in which I'm involved is not at Fort Detrick, and it's not for the Army. It's civilian, the Department of State. I'd like to explain it, if I may." Fergus was only mildly curious. If you like, but I repeat, if it has anything to do with germ warfare, I'm not interested. The colonel seemed to be changing the subject. He asked, have you ever heard the name Helmuth Schultz? And that's the end of chapter 2.